Hi class, it's me again. We're going to be working with assignment 3 in English 1. You're going to need your textbooks, you're going to need your packets, and today we are reading and annotating with a little help from my friends from Funny and Farsi by Firuza Dumas. And this is activity 17, read and annotate in your packet, assignment 3, page 16. And again, we're going to be looking for unfamiliar words. Now this is a memoir, so it does say that we need to find a thesis and main ideas and supporting details, but because this is a memoir, we're not really going to be finding these things. We're going to be looking for the way that she explains things, but we still want to find unfamiliar words, but we want to see more of what are the events in this story instead of just the thesis and main ideas and such. So this story is on page 88 in your textbook. 88 is where it starts. So please turn your books to page 88 and follow along. First, we're going to read about the author. Firuza Dumas was born in 1966, and if it doesn't have a dash and an end date, that means she's still alive. She split her childhood between Iran, the country of her birth, and California. Her father loved to tell stories of his life, and she decided to tell stories too. She originally wrote her first book, Funny and Farsi, for her children. Farsi is the language that Iranians speak. It was published in 2003 and became a bestseller. Today, Dumas travels throughout the world spreading a message of humor and shared humanity. So today we don't have to rank any vocabulary words. Instead, we're going to try to use context clues in order to understand what these words mean. And we're going to look for base words. So proximity, correspondence, and interpreter are the 3 words we are going to be looking at in this text, and we're going to try to define them using our knowledge and our knowledge of the base words. Okay, so it says, with a little help from my friends from Funny and Farsi by Firuza Dumas. Background. Once known as Persia, Iran is an oil-rich country in the Middle East. In 1953, the United States had helped to remove Iran's government and to place a Shah, or king, in power. In 1972, when this excerpt begins, the Iranian government was still a monarchy led by the Shah. However, 7 years later, during the Iranian Revolution of 1979, the country would undergo the political upheaval the author refers to in her first sentence. The Shah would be overthrown and replaced with a government that was unfriendly to the United States. Many Americans returned the hostility. So basically, Iran was a country that the United States supported and that was friendly with the United States until the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and then it was not the case. And so Americans returned the hostility that Iranian government placed, and this is one of the things that the author will refer to in her text, is the negative Iranian sentiment in America. So let's go ahead and start. Paragraph 1. I was lucky to have come to America years before the political upheaval in Iran. The Americans we encountered were kind and curious, unafraid to ask questions and willing to listen. As soon as I spoke enough English to communicate, I found myself being interviewed nonstop by children and adults alike. My life became one long-running Oprah show, minus the free luxury accommodations in Chicago and Oprah. On the topic of Iran, American minds were tabula rasa. Judging from the questions asked, it was clear that most Americans in 1972 had never even heard of Iran. We did our best to educate. You know, Asia? Well, you go south of the Soviet Union, and there we are. Or we'd try to be more bucolic, mentioning being south of the beautiful Caspian Sea. where the famous caviar comes from. Most people in Whittier did not know about the famous caviar, and once we explained what it was, they'd scrunch up their faces. Fish eggs, they would say. Gross. We tried mentioning our proximity to Afghanistan and Iraq, but it was no use. Having exhausted our geographical clues, we would say, "You've heard of India, Japan, or China? We're on the same continent." Okay, I'm going to go back to the first page. And let's go ahead and underline that first sentence. I was lucky to have come to America years before the political upheaval in Iran. And then where it says, Americans we encountered were kind and curious, unafraid to ask questions and willing to listen. So this is just showing you the type of Americans that she found in America when she came from Iran as a young child. Okay. But she's saying not many people even knew much about Iran. So the first word we need to try to define is proximity. So it says we tried mentioning our proximity to Afghanistan or Iraq, but it was no use. So proximity, what could it mean? So like approximate, it's like when something's close to something else. So maybe proximity means when something is close to something else. Maybe? We're just supposed to try to guess the definition of the words. So we're going to go ahead and read paragraph 3. We'd always known that ours is a small country and that America is very big. But even as a 7-year-old, I was surprised that so many Americans had never even noticed us on the map. Perhaps it's like driving a Yugo and realizing that the 18-wheeler can't see you. Okay, so she was 7 years old when she came to America, so quite young. And she said she was surprised that so many Americans had never noticed us on the map. So the fact that Americans were pretty ignorant about where Iran was helped them not have preconceived notions of Iranians. And this is kind of the point she's trying to make. So let's look at paragraph 4. In Iran, geography is a requirement in every grade. Since the government issues textbooks, every student studies the same material in the same grade. In first grade geography, I had to learn the shape of Iran and the location of its capital, Tehran. I had to memorize that we shared borders with Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and the USSR, which is now called the Soviet Union. It's now called Russia. It used to be called the Soviet Union. That's what USSR stands for. Now it's called Russia. I also knew that I lived on the continent of Asia. None of the kids in Whittier, a city an hour outside of Los Angeles, ever asked me about geography. They wanted to know more about important things, such as camels. How many did we own back home? What did we feed them? Was it a bumpy ride? I always disappointed them by admitting that I had never seen a camel in my entire life, and as far as a ride goes, our Chevrolet was rather smooth. They reacted as if I told them that there really was a person in the Mickey Mouse costume. So basically, that when she said she was from Iran, the kids thought that they all rode camels there, and that's all that they knew about Iran. When we were asked about electricity, tents, and the Sahara, once again, we disappointed, admitting that we had electricity, that we did not own a tent, and that the Sahara was on another continent. Intent to remedy the image of our homeland as backward, my father took it upon himself to enlighten Americans whenever possible. Any unsuspecting American who asked my father a question received, as a bonus, a lecture on the successful history of the petroleum industry in Iran. As my father droned on, I watched the faces of these kind Americans, who were undoubtedly making mental notes, never to talk to a foreigner again. My family and I wondered why Americans had such a mistaken image of Iran. We were offered a clue one day by a neighbor who told us that he knew about Iran because he had seen Lawrence of Arabia. Whoever Lawrence was, we had never heard of him, we said. My father then explained that Iranians are an Indo-European people. We are not Arabs. We do, however, have two things in common with Saudi Arabia, he continued, Islam and petroleum. Now, I won't bore you with religion, he said, but let me tell you about the petroleum industry. Another neighbor, a kindly old lady who taught me how to Another neighbor, a kindly old lady who taught me how to take care of indoor plants, asked whether we had many cats back home. My father, with his uncanny ability to forge friendships, said, we don't keep pets in our homes. They are dirty. But your cats are so beautiful, our neighbor said. We had no idea what she was talking about. Seeing our puzzled expression, she showed us a picture of a beautiful long-haired cat. It's a Persian cat, she said. That was news to us. The only cats we had ever seen back home were the mangy strays that ate scraps behind people's houses. From that day, when I told people I was from Iran, I added, where Persian cats come from? That impressed them. I tried my best to be a worthy representative of my homeland. But like a Hollywood celebrity relentlessly pursued by paparazzi, I sometimes got tired of the questions. I, however, never punched anybody with my fist. I used words. One boy at school had a habit of asking me particularly stupid questions. One day he inquired about camels again. This time, perhaps foreshadowing a vocation in storytelling, I told him that yes, we had camels, a one hump and a two hump. The one hump belonged to my parents, and the two hump was our family station wagon. His eyes widened. Where do you keep them? He asked. In the garage, of course, I told him. Having heard what he wanted to hear, he ran off to share his knowledge with the rest of the kids on the playground. He was very angry once he realized that I'd fooled him, but at least he never asked me another question. Okay, let's go back up here to paragraph 9, where it says, I tried my best to be a worthy representative of my homeland. So what she's saying here is because no one knew about Iran, she had to be like an educator to tell people about her country. And if, you can't see it. And if you are from another country, or if you know people from another country, or your family's from another country, then you know that people will tend to ask you about your country and where you're from. And sometimes it's fun, but sometimes people can ask kind of rude questions without trying to be rude. And that's kind of what she's talking about. She's saying, you know, I didn't mind so many questions until they kept going on and on about camels. Then I got upset. And then she's going to talk about how people would ask her to say bad words in her language. And instead of, you'll see, but she didn't like that either. She just thought that wasn't appropriate. So she played a joke on a kid. So, okay, paragraph 13. Often kids tried to be funny by chanting, I ran, to I ran, I ran, to I ran. The correct pronunciation, I always inform them, is Iran. I ran is a sentence, I told them, as in I ran away from my geography lesson. Older boys often ask me to teach them some bad words in your language. At first, I politely refused. My refusal merely increased their determination. So I solved the problem by teaching them phrases like man karam, which means I'm an idiot. I told them that what I was teaching them was so nasty that they would have to promise never to repeat it to anyone. Then they would then spend all of recess running around yelling, "I'm an idiot, I'm an idiot." I never told them the truth. I figured that someday somebody would. But almost every person who asked us a question asked with kindness. Questions were often followed by suggestions of places to visit in California. At school, the same children who inquired about camels also shared their food with me. "I bet you've never tried an Oreo. Have one." Or, "My mom just baked these peanut butter cookies and she sent you one." Kids invited me to their houses to show me what their rooms looked like. On Halloween, one family brought over a costume, knowing that I would surely be the only kid in the Halloween parade without one. If someone had been able to encapsulate the kindness of these second graders in pill form, the pills would undoubtedly put many war correspondents out of business. I'm going to go back to the beginning of that paragraph. So she's saying that almost everyone who asked us a question asked with kindness. So her family felt the kindness of from the Americans. Oh gosh, Americans they met. Her family felt the kindness of the Americans they met. So even though some of them kind of made jokes and some of them annoyed them, for the most part, she felt that the Americans they met were very kind to them. So let's go ahead and underline this sentence too at the top of page 92. If someone had been able to encapsulate the kindness of these second graders in pill form, the pills would undoubtedly put many war correspondents out of business. So one of the words that we have to define is correspondence. So it sounds like you have the word respond in that larger word. So someone who responds is someone who answers a question. So what would be a war correspondent? If it kind of has to do with answering a question. War correspondent. So war correspondent is going to be maybe someone who reports on a war, maybe, for correspondence. And then it says if someone would be able to encapsulate the kindness of these second graders in pill form. So, I'm not quite sure what encapsulate means. So let me think about it for a second. So capsule, that's like a pill, like this kind of pill. Like, you know, the kind of long skinny pill, and one side is usually like a color and the other side is maybe white. And then you have to take that long skinny pill, like maybe a Tylenol pill or something. So she's saying if someone had been able to encapsulate the kindness. So if this could be like a kindness pill. So if we could all take the kindness of these second graders and put it into pill form, then we wouldn't need wars. That's basically what she's saying. So if we couldn't put all the kindness that she felt as a second grader into pill form, we would not have wars. So that's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and read paragraph 16. After almost 2 years in Whittier, my father's assignment was completed and we had to return home. The last month of our stay, I attended one slumber party after another, all thrown in my honor. This avalanche of kindness did not make our impending departure any easier. Everyone wanted to know when we would come back to America. We had no answer, but we invited them all to visit us in Iran. I knew no one would ever take us up on our offer because Iran was off the radar screen for most people. My friends considered visiting their grandmothers in Oregon to be a long trip. So visiting me in Iran was like taking a left turn at the next moon. It wasn't going to happen. I didn't know then that I would indeed be returning to America about 2 years later. Between frenzied shopping trips to Sears to buy presents for our relatives back home, my mother spent her last few weeks giving gifts to our American friends. I had wondered why my mother had brought so many Persian handicrafts with her. Now I knew. Everyone from my teachers to the crossing guard to the brownie leader to my neighbors, crossing guard to the brownie leader to the neighbors received something. This is from my country, especially for you, she would explain. These handicrafts, which probably turned up in garage sales the following year, were received with tears and promises to write. My mother was particularly sad to return to Iran. I had always assumed that she would be relieved to return to her family and to a land where she spoke the language and didn't need me to act as her interpreter. But I realized later that even though my mother could not understand anything the crossing guard, Mrs. Popkins, said, she understood that this woman looked out for me. And she had understood her smiles, even though my mother never attended a brownie meeting. She knew that the leader, Carrie's mom, opened up her home for us every week and led us through all kinds of projects. No one paid her for this. My mother knew that when it had been my turn to bring snacks for the class, one of the moms had stepped in and baked cupcakes. My best friend Connie's older sister, Michelle, had tried to teach me to ride a bike, and Heather's mom, although single with 2 daughters, had hosted me overnight more times than I can remember. Even though I had been the beneficiary of all the attention, my mother, watching silently from a distance, had also felt the warmth of generosity and kindness. It was hard to leave. So, even though I had been the beneficiary of all the attention, my mother also felt the warmth of generosity and kindness. It was hard to leave. So they felt very welcome, and they felt sad to leave America because they felt so welcomed and loved in America. So I think we all know what interpreter means, but this is the other word that we need to try to figure out the meaning of. So I'd always assumed that she would be relieved to her return to her family, to a land where she spoke the language. So I'm guessing it has something to do with language, and didn't need me to act as her interpreter. So interpreter, she spoke the language, she didn't need me to act as interpreter. So I'm guessing it means someone who translates a language for someone else. That's what I'm guessing interpreter means. Notice how I'm not looking up the words in the dictionary. These definitions aren't necessarily correct, but these are my guessed definitions. And that's what you're supposed to do when you guess the definitions, is you're supposed to use the context clues and just make your best guess. Okay, so the author is making this point that she was treated very kindly in America. Even though some kids kind of made fun of her, for the most part, she felt the kindness and generosity of her friends and neighbors in America. And then you're going to see kind of what happened after the Iranian Revolution. So paragraph 19 at the bottom. When my parents and I get together today, we often talk about our first year in America. Even though 30 years have passed, our memories have not faded. We remember the kindness more than ever, knowing that our relatives who immigrated to this country after the Iranian Revolution did not encounter the same America. They saw Americans who had bumper stickers on their cars that read, "Iranians go home," or "We play cowboys and Iranians." The Americans they met rarely invited them to their houses. These Americans felt that they knew all about Iran and its people, and they had no questions, just opinions. my relatives did not think Americans were very kind. So all of a sudden, because of the Iranian Revolution, Americans started to have these kind of preconceived notions about what Iranians were about, and they saw Iranians as bad or the enemy. And so because of these preconceived notions, her relatives who came to America were not treated as kindly as she was. So after the Iranian Revolution, Iranians were not treated as kindly in America. So the unfortunate thing is, because they had never heard of this country, Iran, people welcomed her and opened their home up to her, these Americans. But as soon as there was Iran in the news, and as soon as there was this kind of negative image of Iran, all of a sudden Americans felt like they knew who Iranians were, knew that they were bad, and so they stopped treating Iranians with kindness. And if you, they thought they were bad, not knew they were bad, but they thought that they were bad. So they didn't ask questions. They didn't try to get to know the person. They just already thought they knew them and didn't treat them well. So if you're from a different culture, your family's from a different culture, you may have experiences as well. People just judging you before they get to know you. So we are done with this reading for today. Make sure you have all the annotations that I have. And I just need to stop the video. See you next time.